Now to the Middle East, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will restart negotiations to end the war in Gaza. But he's also moving ahead with a military takeover of Gaza City, the last refuge for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Many Palestinians are fleeing Gaza City in anticipation of the invasion. Israel's military already controls the outskirts, and Netanyahu is expected to give final approval for the full operation any day now. Israel has also approved an expansion of settlement in the occupied West Bank. It would essentially split the Palestinian territory and make a two-state solution unviable. Canada has joined dozens of other countries in condemning both of Israel's decisions this week. Joining me now, Randa Slim, is a non-resident senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Jon Allen was Canada's ambassador to Israel and is now a senior fellow at the Bill Graham Centre for Contemporary International History. Welcome to you both. Randa, Israel is beginning its military operation to take over Gaza City, while in the same breath saying it will begin immediate negotiations to end the war in Gaza. What do you make of the timing of both of these actions by the Israeli government?
I think it is Mr. Netanyahu trying to please different audiences domestically, but also in the international community. On one hand, he has his right-wing coalition, which is supported by a good majority of the Israeli society that wants to, complete the ethnic cleansing campaign of Palestinians and force 2 million Palestinians out of their home in Gaza. And on the other hand, you have the families of the hostages. We think there are about 20 Israeli hostages still alive. There are about 30 dead bodies that are still controlled by Hamas. So he wants to please also the families of the hostages, the international community that doesn't want this attack to proceed by saying, oh, we have the negotiation started. But he knows fully well that once this attack, this campaign starts, it's going to be very hard to, for the negotiation to succeed. The ceasefire proposal, the deal has been on the table for some time. And every time there are different reasons for Mr. Netanyahu to back away from it, partly for his own political survival.
Jon, Hamas has already agreed to the latest ceasefire proposal. We've just been waiting on word from Israel. What do you think is holding Israel back? Are they waiting for something in particular, or is it just that they're not interested in ceasing fire?
I think they're not interested in a ceasefire at this point. In fact, the deal that's on the table is one that was in place and resulted in 30 hostages being released before it was unilaterally breached by Netanyahu. Just months ago, he was interested in a partial deal, and Hamas reputedly wasn't at the time. And now that it's back on the table, Netanyahu is refusing it. And the fact that he's going ahead with this Gaza plan, one that has been opposed by his own chief of staff, which his former Minister of Defense and former chief of staff have said there are no more achievable military objectives in Gaza to be had, is just, as my colleague said, an effort to keep his two messianic right-wing ministers in the coalition and keep him in power as long as possible.
Randa, Israel just approved a settlement project in the occupied West Bank that would effectively cut that territory in two. How will that complicate negotiations for a two-state solution?
I mean, the Israeli finance minister said it. It removes the Palestinian state from the table. I think we can, declare that the two-state solution is now officially off the table. So the international community can recognize a Palestinian state, as some countries have done recently, including Canada, although Canada has put some conditions on its recognition of a Palestinian state. But in fact, there are fait accompli on the ground that are being created, like these settlements, like the 750,000 armed settlers that have the full support of the Israeli government, and that intend on basically, removing that option from the table, but also taking over all these lands in the occupied West Bank, and that's in violation of international law. And so it behooves the international community. I understand. I mean, it's very good to pay, lip service to recognize Palestinian rights, but we have to start really thinking seriously about what we are going to do about these thousands, hundreds of thousands of, armed Jewish settlers who are going to make this, who basically are intent on erasing Palestinians.
Jon, this is a project that's been under consideration for over 2 decades. So what does it tell you that Israel is moving on this now?
Well, up until now, the Americans have basically prevented Israel from going ahead with it. Ironically, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave an interview on TV yesterday in which he called Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and the minister behind this approval of so-called E1, 30,000 new homes. Netanyahu called him a fringe minister. And yet he is the man that's been responsible for all the new illegal settlements. He's been responsible for pushing this through. And as was said, if this goes ahead, it will split the West Bank in half. It will divide and make it impossible to get from Ramallah to Bethlehem. It's already incredibly difficult for Palestinians to move around the West Bank. So this really does have to be stopped. I have supported recognition of Palestine for a variety of reasons, and some of the reasons given by Canada were specifically to prevent the threat of the end of a Palestinian state. And I think that, as was said, I think countries are now going to have to act, whether it be trade sanctions, whether it be recalling their ambassador. They're going to have to act. It's not necessarily going to affect Prime Minister Netanyahu, but they do have to send a signal that this is completely unacceptable. As is the plan to force somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million people from Gaza City into an area where there is not enough food, not enough medicine, and certainly not enough accommodation for them.
Randa, you mentioned lip service and that it's time to not do that anymore and to actually really come out strongly against what's going on. Canada has come out and signed a joint statement with dozens of other countries condemning this latest settlement plan, and yet international criticism, as you've noted, hasn't seemed to deter Israel so far. So do you think there is a point we could reach where Israel won't be able to ignore international pressure any longer?
I mean, definitely there are, as my colleague said, there are trade sanctions. There are, a lot of countries are still sending and selling weapons to Israel. Israeli officials are still welcome in many capitals. And so I think there are certain policies that governments can take to send a stronger signal than they have done today. The problem is that for Mr. Netanyahu, the only country that matters is the United States. And unfortunately, I don't see the Trump administration willing to engage in any kind of these sanctions. And in fact, I'm afraid that what Mr. Netanyahu is doing in Gaza with this ethnic cleansing, with forcing people out of their homes, is basically realizing and very much in sync with what Mr. Trump has declared of wanting to have a Riviera, in Gaza. And so as long as this administration in the United States is supporting the Israeli government and is not pushing the Israeli government toward making concessions, toward stopping the settlement, as my colleague said, past administration have stopped some of these settlements, not successfully most of the time, but sometimes they were able to stop that. This settlement itself that is just approved by the Israeli government has been on the books for some time, has been stopped in the past by previous administration. With this administration, it's very clear that Mr. Netanyahu got the green light to proceed with it.
John, we only have less than a minute left, but I did want to ask you really quickly whether or not you see any hope of that changing, of Donald Trump taking a different approach to the Middle East and perhaps more pressure on Israel to back off of what it's doing.
Well, the only thing that has moved Trump so far is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That forced him in a way to tell the Israelis to start opening up the gates and allowing more trucks in. That hasn't exactly worked because there's not enough food going in, but it was an effort to improve the situation. And if a million people end up in the south and there is a renewed crisis, as there will be, perhaps he may act. But that will be in respect of Gaza, and not necessarily in respect of the West Bank, where his own ambassador essentially claims that what Israel is doing is legal, the settlements are legal, and he calls it Judea and Samaria, as do the Israeli settlers there. So I don't see him acting on the West Bank, but hopefully he may do something vis-a-vis Gaza.
Well, thank you both for your time. Jon Allen and Randa Slim.
Thank you.
Thank you.